podcast with Dallas Holm. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Jennifer.
Good. We are in week 7, I believe, of the quarantine for COVID. So someday, 10 years from now when you're watching this, you'll be able to reference and realize where we are right now.
Well,
how has it been?
I was thinking we could judge by the length of my hair.
Yeah.
I haven't been able
really.
to get to actually I sent a picture the other day. I got up, I think it was 2 mornings ago, and my hair was just everywhere, and it's gotten longer than it's been in a long, long time. So I purposefully put some stuff in it to really make it stick out all over, and then I put some weird glasses on, made an awful face, and sent it to the lady who cuts my hair. Said, look, this virus thing's got to
no joke.
get over with because my hair is getting so long. But I'm looking at some of the old album covers and I go, I'm not even close to that yet, so we'll see how long.
Well, every 20 years, things come back around,
That's
so
true.
You're just right back in style.
Keep my bell bottoms handy.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, we always have something interesting on the table right here, and sometimes we talk about it, and sometimes we don't. What's this? Obviously, it's a baseball, but what?
That's a baseball.
What's
I
the
don't know if we can
significance?
Move it up closer to, you can maybe see it says to Kurt, who was my dad. Best wishes, Johnny Oates, Jeremiah 29:11. My dad's name was actually Howard Curtis Holm, but everybody called him Kurt. Kurt, I'm calling him Kurt. Dad loved baseball. He was a
he
big
did.
baseball fan. That was his favorite sport. When he was in the Army, he played, probably on a company team or something, But he was one of those guys that baseball probably has more strategy than any sport. I have trouble watching it just because it's gotten so slow.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, I mean, the pitcher's got to, pull his cap and spit and
Yeah.
walk to the mound, walk off the mound, get the signal, look to first base, call his wife, text, whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just so. If
Almost
they could,
as slow as Nadal in tennis.
exactly. If they could just speed it up a little bit, because it's a wonderful game. I of all the sports I played, and I didn't excel at any of them, but I loved baseball. I think the strategy, you have to be able to hit, catch, run, know what's going on, who's, the old Abbott and Costello routine, who's on first.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to know all that stuff. Well, my dad was one of those, which I still don't know the strategy, especially like in the National League, which I'm generally an American League guy because I grew up in Minnesota rooting for the Minnesota Twins. Now I live in Texas, I root for the Rangers. But honestly, National League baseball is a little more fun because the pitchers have to hit, so the strategy changes a lot. But my dad was one of those guys that knew if there were 2 outs and there was a guy on second base and whoever was up to bat and the pitcher, the count was 2 balls and 1 strike, he knew what pitch he was going to throw. He just knew all this strategy about it. So it was really, really fun to sit with my dad and watch a baseball game. I enjoyed watching baseball, but I enjoyed more just watching with my dad because I knew he liked it. And I knew that he could educate me as to, how did you know that? How did you know that guy was going to do that? So anyway, I had the privilege I met the chaplain for the Rangers. At the time, I think he was the chaplain for the Rangers and the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
And we met at a particular, I think it was a Fellowship of Christian Athletes gathering, and I ministered, sang, and shared a little bit. And he said, would you like to come to a chapel service for the Rangers? And it was like, oh, man, I would love that. So on a Sunday, I actually did 2 of them. Sunday, I would show up early because they have their chapel services before the ball game. Ball game is usually early afternoon sometime. So it'd have like a 20-minute chapel service in the opposing team's locker room, which the first time I ever did it, it was the Minnesota Twins. So that was kind of cool. To go to the Twins locker room and do their chapel service. And in fact, that particular game, to make it extra interesting, we're from Lindale, Texas, small town East Texas, but the Mahomes family has turned out some pretty incredible athletes. Pat Mahomes, Pat Sr., at that time was pitching for the Minnesota Twins. In fact, he pitched that particular game.
Oh, that's cool.
So it was really hard for me because by that time I had become a Rangers fan, but I was still very much a Twins fan. And of course, hometown hero Pat Mahomes is pitching, which now, of course, we know his son Patrick Mahomes, who was quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, who won the Super Bowl.
You may have heard of him.
Yeah, I may have heard of him. So anyway, I was like a kid in a candy store, as they say. I'm trying to be this minister leading the chapel service, but inside I'm going, whoa, dude, this is so cool.
Yeah.
So, and I actually brought a couple balls with me. I think that's the one where Jeffrey, your brother, our son, came along with me. And he was probably, I don't know, 12, 13, maybe something like that. So I brought a couple baseballs and got them autographed by all kinds of players. So I'd go over and do the Twins chapel service. I'd come back and do the Rangers chapel service. And then, got some signatures on the balls. And then I went out also and sang the national anthem at the stadium. So that was, it was really cool. I did that twice. The other time I did it, it was the Seattle Mariners that came to town. So I did a chapel service for them. Johnny Oates was the coach, wonderful man, wonderful Christian man. And at that time, my dad his health was really diminishing. And I thought, I bet he'd like a baseball. So I asked Johnny Oates, would you sign a baseball for my dad, which he did. And my dad was so proud. My dad was very understated, kind of quiet, but I could tell that, that was a big deal that he got an autographed baseball from Johnny Oates. And then Johnny Oates sadly passed not too long after that. He had some health issues, which at the time he signed the ball from my dad, I don't think he knew that he was dealing with something at that time. So that was probably about, I'm thinking around 2000, probably either 99 or 2000 that I did those two ball games. So anyway, that was a very special
that's cool.
gift for my dad, and I keep it handy, and I watch the Rangers and put the baseball out there.
Yeah.
So.
The other thing I loved about Grandpa, he went through 6th grade or 8th grade. What was his education through?
Let me think now. What would you be when you're 12 years old? Would that be
6th grade.
Yeah, he was 6th grade.
So he had a 6th grade education. He came from a very big family, and he needed to leave school so that he could work, right?
Yeah, back then, it came from a family of 13 kids. Of course, they weren't all there at the same time, but very, very poor, tough times. When you got to be 12 years old, you worked to help support the family.
Yeah.
So he left school. In fact, I came across looking through some old papers and stuff the other day, I came across his, I don't know what you'd call it, diploma that he had successfully graduated from 6th grade. So that's going back quite a ways.
Yeah, that's amazing. But as I was a kid and he was an older man, he would sit and watch Jeopardy and be able to answer 80% of the questions. Yeah. And Jeopardy's no easy game. And I would think, how do you know that? But he never stopped learning. No, he valued education and did it on his own.
Exactly, and we used to say, and I still believe that, you could put Dad in a room of anybody, scientists, doctors, attorneys, you name it, or a mixture of all of the above, and he could make a contribution. He probably wouldn't be inclined, because he was so comfortable to just sit there and to learn and listen.
And he was humble.
He was, but he could, because he read the newspaper every day, read, I think, cover to cover, everything, and just read and listened and learned. Yeah. He was a great student, very well-read man, milkman all his life, very, very simple vocation, but he knew a lot.
Yeah, he did. He did. He was an impressive man.
Yeah, he was.
Well, today we are going to talk about a song called Through the Flame on the self-titled project, Through the Flame. This was, again, I should have looked up this earlier. What do you think the year was? 90?
Yeah, maybe? Probably so. That'd be
about
close.
1990?
Yeah, early 90s, I think. Let's see if I can see it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have my readers. So in the chapter, which, again, we are shooting these podcasts called Here We Are,
Looks
based
like it says
on
93,
songs.
I think.
Oh, 93? Based on songs from this book, Words of Hope and Comfort. And this chapter is Through the Flame. So in this chapter, you talk about a little garbage can fire. You want to quickly tell us about that?
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, it was a true story, as they say. Truth is stranger than fiction. Some friends of ours, longtime friends of my folks, Don and Phyllis Setterman, he's still living. I think he lives out near the Asheville, North Carolina?
North Carolina.
Area. And I still get a letter from him now and
Aww.
then. Yeah. But he lived down what we call Great Cloud Island, which was where the Mississippi kind of took a turn. It created an island that was, I forget how many acres. There were probably, I don't know, a couple hundred residents on the whole island. There were houses. It was probably a couple miles to ride your bike around. Mm-hmm. And road went in one side and came out the other. We call it the first fill and the second fill. That's what connected the island to the mainland. And Setterman's lived after you went across the first fill, and you went up a hill and went about probably half, 3/4 of a mile, and their house was on the right. And one Saturday he called and asked did I want to come down and help him. It was in the fall and rake leaves. Typically a kid probably wouldn't want to do that, but fall weather, the coolness in Minnesota, the color change,
best time of year.
Yeah, the leaves falling, that was something I couldn't pass up. Yeah, I'll be there. And his boy Steve was there, and Steve and I were going to help Don, rake the leaves. Well, we're out there raking leaves, and back then, I'm sure still, you'd rake a big pile of leaves, and you'd eventually dump them in a 55-gallon drum, light them on fire, burn them. You just kept this going all day. Of course, the fire was a great smell. And so at one point, I was probably about Alex's age, your third, 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there. And he said, Dallas, take all those leaves there and tamp them down in that barrel. And he said, just pour a little gasoline on them. He had a can there, and we'll burn those. Well, a little gasoline is a relative term.
Yeah.
Seemed like a little to me as I went like that. And he wasn't looking.
In a metal drum.
Yeah, he's raking. So, of course, this is great. I mean, a 12-year-old boy with matches and gasoline, you just get to light a match and burn. That's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
So I lit that match and I dropped it in. Well, it was just like a mortar shell. It was. In fact, I looked up. I think I explained in the book the definition of a mortar. Very large diameter cannon with a low velocity, but whatever. It perfectly described what happened because every leaf that we had packed down in there suddenly blew up.
Yeah.
I just fell backwards right on my back, and all I can remember is looking up, and there was Don looking over at me. Are you okay? And he looked so surprised. And when I got home, I realized why, because all my eyebrows had been singed off. The front part of my
goodness.
hair was singed off. So, yeah, that was one of those memorable moments of course, now being a dad and a granddad, I can imagine he was probably just terrified that he just burned up and destroyed the curtain tool as little boy, but I was fine.
Well, spiritually speaking, this song is Through the Flame and talking about Christians walking through trials and equating it to the fire.
Well, and that wonderful scripture, that says, and that's the heart of it really, because it says, when you pass through the flame, when you go through the floods. The when is maybe the most significant word in there, because it doesn't say if you go through the flame or if you go through the flood.
Right.
It says when. In other words, we are assured, and we keep kind of coming back to this issue, but I think that's one of the purposes of this thing that we're doing here. We want to teach and bring balance and perspective and truth, the truth of the gospel.
Yes.
This is, we're going to tell funny stories and we look at baseballs and who knows what else we'll look at, but the purpose of all of this is to focus on the truth of the gospel for those of you who are watching this, that you might gain something spiritually. And this is, again, incredibly significant because there are many, many voices out there in the marketplace today who are blatantly offering the idea that if you are a Christian, you really shouldn't have problems. You shouldn't be sick. You ought to be wealthy. There are some people in, quote, they call it ministry, where they actually chant. They have them chant, money cometh. Come on, let's believe. Let's exercise. Money cometh. Christians ought to be rich. That's part of the thing. It is so contrary to the gospel that, again, it's embarrassing / maddening. Because when you're a person going through the flame or through the flood of adversity and difficulty, the last thing you need is to be told something that's not true.
Right.
That will allegedly help you. It only compounds the difficulty of it all. If you believe one of these, that, well, if I'm living in a proper relationship to the Lord, I shouldn't have any problems. Then when the problem comes, it's doubly difficult, because not only am I dealing with the problem, but I'm dealing with the issue of what's wrong with me.
It's a real faith crisis then.
It really is. And faith becomes all about, that false teaching all revolves around a very self-centered concept of faith. That it's all about me. It's this idea, and I've heard it preached many times through the years, about the mustard seed. And it's always taught, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed. I challenge anyone and everyone to look up in Scripture that story and see where it says faith the size of. It does not say that. It does not say the size of. It says if you had faith as a mustard seed. So what these people are doing is teaching people that if, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is the most faith you can have, then somehow, again, within yourself, or by buying enough books or giving enough money to one of these people, I can muster my faith. I go, I'm at a 7. You got people out there just trying. Again, it's self-centered, trying within themselves to boost their faith, believing that if I can just get it up to enough, then I'll get the answers to my prayers. But if I don't, there's something wrong with me and there's something wrong with my faith. It always comes back to self. No matter how you break it down, it's always self-centered. If you would succeed in this realm of faith, the way it's being taught, it's still about you.
Right.
If you don't succeed, it's still about you. Right there, that should be the indication that something's wrong, because it's never about us. It's all about Him.
Right.
And our yieldedness to Him. So, really, that scripture about the mustard seed, if you had the faith as a mustard, what does that really mean? It really means the opposite, I think, of what's been taught. It's been taught that if you get this much faith, then, even that is self-condemning, because what it tells people is, oh my goodness, I've been trying, I've been doing everything, I've been living for the Lord. I can't even get my faith to the size of a mustard seed.
Yeah.
How condemning is that? It's not what the scripture is talking about. If you have faith as a mustard seed. So what is a mustard seed? What is it? Mustard seed is a tiny little seed. But when it's planted in fertile ground, it spreads a root system that's just enormous. And Scripture says it grows into this great tree where the birds nest and carry on life. It's kind of that, say it properly, but the kind of that circle of life thing, in a proper context. So really what it's saying is, my understanding is, look, the tiniest little bit of true faith,
right,
buried in properly cultivated soil. We know this from the parable of the soils, that the seed of truth, of the gospel, if you will, is cast upon 4 different types of soils, and there's only one type in which it takes root. But when that little teeny mustard seed takes root in the proper soil, it grows into this gigantic thing that the birds come and there's life. To me, that's the teaching. It's not about, get your faith up to, boy, if you can get it to a 9, you'll get everything you ever wanted. That really is what I call a genie in the lamp type faith. It's we treat faith as though it's the Aladdin's lamp, and if we rub it properly, and the genie Jesus pops out and gives us our 3 wishes, and it's just so wrong, so self-centered. Struggle is part of the package. Through the flame is part of the package. We know this from way back when the 3 Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, go into the furnace. They went into the furnace. Yep. That was God's plan and purpose. Yep. Interesting that in that story, when King Nebuchadnezzar sees them walking around, and at one point he says, didn't we throw 3 in, but I see a 4th, and the 4th appears to me as the son of the gods. The only thing that changed, nothing changed at all, except they went in bound and they came out free. Yep. So we deduce from this that it was actually in the furnace that freedom was accomplished. They could have applied this new contemporary teaching on faith. I speak against that furnace. No Christian should ever go through the furnace. Scripture talks about these boys as being good looking, bright, articulate, cream of the crop, faithful to God, these 3 in Daniel. And what happens? God lets them go into the furnace. It's all prepared by God, a sovereign God who's up to things. We know nothing about. They didn't know about it. They were just being obedient. Yeah. But the freedom was gained in the midst of the furnace. So some of you are going through the furnace now, but your freedom can and will be gained as you look to a faithful God and invest your faith in Him, not groaning and gritting your teeth trying to muster up some particular dynamic of faith. But when you realize, hey, my faith is just like a mustard seed. Yeah, it's maybe small, but it's planted in fertile soil, and life will come from this, and freedom will come as it did for those boys.
Yes. And you reference this scripture, Isaiah 43:2, and it talks about waters and about fire, the when you walk through and when you pass through the waters. But fire and water are both refining and cleansing
Right.
sources.
Right.
God uses both of them. So be encouraged that your faith is being perfected, just like James says.
Yep.
Perseverance and perfection is the end result. So we will come back with a different song, a different day. Be blessed. Have a great day.